Hace unos 13 años estaba investigando y leyendo mucho sobre los Beatles para escribir mi tesis de literatura, y en medio de todas esas lecturas había un nombre que no dejaba de aparecer y era un tal Steve Turner, que aparentemente era uno de los grandes expertos en el mundo en la obra de los Beatles. Lo que no sabía en ese momento, y descubrí, por cierto, hace no tanto, es que este tal Steve Turner, además de ser un nerd de los Beatles y un gran periodista musical, es un crítico cultural, es un poeta y es un creyente comprometido. Este combo es rarísimo, pero por supuesto me gusta mucho. Y Steve ha escrito sobre un montón de cosas, sobre rock y redención, sobre cómo mirar cristianamente la cultura popular, sobre arte y su relación con la religión, además de haber entrevistado a un montón de los grandes referentes de la música popular de los últimos 50, 60 años. No sé, Bono, Eric Clapton, Sting, Leonard Cohen, Paul McCartney. De hecho, acá él está haciendo una famosa entrevista a John y Yoko a principios de los 70. Desde que descubrí que Steve Turner tenía esta extraña mezcla de crítico cultural y teólogo popular, he leído bastantes de las cosas que él ha publicado, y de hecho, si te acordás, hace unos meses publiqué un video sobre canciones famosas inspiradas en la Biblia. Bueno, de hecho, ese video le debe mucho a uno de sus libros que se llama Turn, 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 como la famosa canción de los Birds. En fin, no la hago más larga. Hace unos días estuve en Londres en un evento y le escribí a Steve a ver si nos podíamos ver y charlar un poquito de estas cosas que nos mueven el corazón, y él fue súper generoso, me abrió su casa y estuvimos hablando un buen rato. Precisamente esto fue lo que charlamos. Steve, thank you very much for having this time. Thank you for opening your house. It's such a pleasure to me to be here. How are you?
Very, very well. Yeah.
We have been talking for an hour now about pop culture and the Beatles and the arts, and how to have Christian understanding of reality and culture.
Yeah.
So I think that we have a lot in common. Like I said, I met you through your Beatles books a lot of years ago when I was writing my thesis, and much later I discovered your writings on art and faith and a Christian vision of popular culture. So it was really a nice surprise to see those worlds come together. Maybe I can start with a kind of origin story.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I loved listening to the Beatles and Elvis and Pink Floyd and the Bee Gees. My dad used to be a DJ before converting and becoming a pastor. So I eventually inherited his albums.
Okay.
But like I said, I was a pastor's kid.
Yeah.
So a lot of people around me saw it like that music was dangerous and maybe even, I don't know, demonic. So that was kind of my origin story. And it took me years to realize that it was not so simple to build, or God or the devil, or black and white, or those kind of dualistic thinking. In popular culture, you find all the time darkness and light, and the fall and redemption and misery and spiritual quest. So what about you? How did your own story begin between those two worlds, the church and the rock and roll, and how do you learn how to live in the space in between?
Yeah, I mean, my background was quite similar. My parents didn't come from Christian backgrounds, but have become Christians. And in my early childhood, my dad was trying to sort of come to terms with what his faith meant and how you would worship and how it would affect his life. And he would get literature from America. He would listen to American preachers on Radio Luxembourg. And he was trying to sort of find his way. And he eventually started, I think in about 1958, a small brethren-style Christian fellowship, Christian meeting. And that's what I grew up with. And they used to meet in a building that was on the market square of our town. And just outside the building was a bus stop, and the rockers, the guys that had leather jackets with their names in studs on the back, and huge, powerful motorcycles. They would all line up out there, and I would be embarrassed to be going to church and see these guys. They probably wouldn't have even noticed me, but I would keep my Bible kind of upside down and with the Holy Bible bit hidden as I would go to church. And I was secretly sort of hankering to be with them or people like them. Or just beyond on the other side of the Market Square was the Milk Bar, and it had a jukebox, and that was where most people heard records at high volume for the first time. And they very much seemed like two different sort of worlds. Typically, people in the Christian Assembly, if they like music at all, it would be somebody like George Beverly Shea, who used to sing for Billy Graham.
Yeah,
there was a sort of conventional sort of music that they would like. I can never remember somebody saying, you shouldn't listen to rock and roll or whatever, but it was slightly on the perimeters of life, and there was no attempt to sort of, like, you dealt with the cinema by not going to the cinema. Mm-hmm. You didn't deal with the cinema by going and having a conversation about what you'd just seen. So there was a sort of a screening out of popular culture. And I was mostly helped, after I'd become a Christian at 19, I was mostly helped by writers like Dr. Francis Schaeffer, who ran the L'Abri community in Switzerland, and Hans Ruttmark, who was an art historian and a friend of Dr. Schaeffer's. Their thinking really helped me to understand how you could appreciate the arts, how the arts could sort of ennoble you and give you fresh, good experiences. And there were other people at the same time were being affected by Schaeffer and Ruttmarker, and there's a group called the InterVarsity, what was it called then? InterVarsity Fellowship, IVF it was called at the time. And they used to work with students in different sort of colleges. And so they would have specific people assigned to art colleges, for example. And they did a big weekend in 1969 that I went to. And that's where first time I've met my contemporaries who would talk about speaking in tongues, and they'd talk about going and seeing the Stones in Hyde Park. And I'd never been around people my age who
could do both.
Yeah, effortlessly liked music and had theological curiosities. So that and I know a lot of those people today, still know them. And a couple of years later, a friend of mine, Nigel Goodwin, started a group called the Arts Centre Group in London. And the specific aim of that was to explore faith and the arts. And there were different groups for each discipline. Like there was a group for graphic artists, a group for cartoonists, a group for photographers and musicians and actors and actresses and sculptors, which is fantastic. And another good thing about that was, like, when I came to do a book, I could ask, one person could do the cartoons for my book, and another guy would know about photography for the cover, and somebody else would know about layout and typefaces and things like that. So that was a really good experience. And I saw that happen in other cities around the world, Los Angeles, New York, Paris. But they've tended to be sort of short-lived movements, often based around like a particular individual, like Mako Fujimura, who's a painter. He started the group in New York. But I still think there are those people out there in these cities, in these parts of the world. And it's good when they do come together and can sort of talk things through and not feel alone. Like actors and actresses, I mean, they often would have issues like, I'm playing this character and this character commits adultery. Is that wrong, And you say, well, what's the story? What's the point of the whole story? What's the moral of the whole story? You can't just sort of pick up on one incident in the story. So different people in different disciplines had different big questions that they would want to ask. Should I take my clothes off in a film? I mean, that wasn't an issue for me because I wasn't in a film, but it would be for an actor or an actress. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a community of artists that are trying to live as well with their theological ideas in order, but their aesthetic concerns in order as well. So I think these two worlds are difficult to connect when you are for so long being used to have like the sacred category in one place and the secular in the other. So it's very important to have a conversation about this, that is not to have the answers, but to have like predisposition to start unraveling the truth about it.
I mean, I think it was 1976, a bunch of us from the Art Centre group all went up to Edinburgh, where every year there's the Edinburgh Festival and there's the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, which is the one that gets most talked about. And there's just like every available space in Edinburgh is taken up by theatre troupes and poets and jugglers and clowns and whatever. And we went up and had a space and put on a play. I did a poetry reading. Somebody else played music. It was like a real coming together of these Christian artists and who just played alongside whoever else was playing at the Edinburgh Festival. But it gave us a voice.
Those kind of mixing, of joining of people. I think we really need this in the Spanish-speaking world as well. There are few groups doing that, but I think it's very important. And one thing that I really appreciate in your book is that you don't just treat culture just as a background noise. You treat it as something that really matters, not only to the human experience, but also to think about our faith and the transcendence. I often said that culture probably is the biggest theological question of the 21st century, because we are constantly speaking about it, even when we are not, we don't know that we are talking about the doctrine of culture. Culture is not only the place that we live in, it's also the place where our beliefs are tested. What we think about God, about humanity, about sin, about redemption, it's explained in the way that we treat culture. So after all these years writing and thinking, what do you feel you've learned about how to look at culture with Christian eyes, without becoming either naive or maybe paranoid about it?
Right. That's a hard question. I mean, ultimately, you learn by not just seeing the things, but like reading reviews and reading different reviews by different people. So you get a kind of a spectrum of views on something, and then discussing with like-minded friends. In this case, Christian friends. And I think often dealing with culture is like a sort of resistance exercise in many ways. Like you build up physical strength by pushing against something or lifting something that's hard to lift. And I think you develop your faith in your Christian thinking by exposing yourself to different ideas and challenging ideas, and really sort of wrestling with it rather than just letting it wash over you. I mean, I think that's one of the big changes I've seen is like my generation of younger Christians who wanted to be involved in the arts faced this problem of like, well, should you be doing it in the first place? Should you be going into the arts, or is it a forbidden territory? Then once you'd overcome that and you said it was okay to do it, well, it's okay to do it, but do you just use it for evangelism or some higher spiritual purpose, or can you just talk about ordinary stuff like having a hot bath or drinking a coffee, or can the ordinary stuff of life be part of the art and the culture that you build, or does it have to be something that people would recognize as religious? And then those of us that concluded, no, it doesn't have to be sort of religious in that sense. The danger is people just think, well, that's fine. I'm a Christian. I don't have to evangelize. Therefore, I can just go and do what I like. I'm in a rock band. It doesn't have to be an evangelistic rock band. could be any old rock band. But I think that's as bad because you're not showing the sort of fingerprint of theology or your relationship with God at all. Then, I mean, if that's happening, then you're not really doing what you should be doing. There should be some difference. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Beatles. I mean, they without sitting down and saying, here are the views that we want to communicate on this album, they nevertheless put forward a series of views by, you could tell what they believed. Like when they sing about Dr. Robert, you know that they're in favor of recreational drugs, you know, and so on. Eleanor Rigby, I mean, it's a great story that Paul tells, and it was just, he just started with the first few lines and thought, oh, you know, what's Eleanor Rigby doing in the church? Why is she doing that? And he kind of built the story up from that point of view. But it did kind of show his feelings about the church. You know, no one was saved.
Yeah, desperation.
And the church is associated with loneliness and lack of fulfillment. But that's just done in that unconscious way that artists do when they're dealing with material.
Yeah, you put out there what you have inside.
Exactly, yeah. If you're good.
Yeah.
If you're not good, then you put out what's not there. You know, maybe you... I mean, there are certain artists like, for example, Elton John. I don't really know what he thinks from his song. I mean, he doesn't write his own lyrics.
Yeah, in fact.
It's not something in his songs that makes me think, oh, Elton John's that type of person. Whereas when you heard Chris Christopherson or Leonard Cohen, I mean, you really knew what was going on in their soul, you know. So what have I learned? I don't think there's like one. The other helpful thing is I also write poetry and perform it. So I always saw myself as somebody who was an artist who was doing material that was to be performed in public. And I was interviewing people who were artists who were doing material that was to be performed in public, which was rock music in their case, poetry in my case. So I kind of understood what these people were doing and how they created from my own experience of getting up and you know, reading poems that I'd written in front of people. Like when you have to sort of orchestrate a set of poems. You know, you have to start with something that's probably people aren't going to retain because they think, oh, I've never seen a poet before, and so they're just kind of adjusting. And then you might put a funny poem in to put them at their ease, and then you do a bit more thoughtful poem, and you know, and you go down, and then you go back up, and all this sort of thing. And I could relate to musicians who would also talk about building their sets. Yeah. I remember I interviewed Bruce Springsteen in Copenhagen, I think it was. No, Stockholm. And I went in the dressing room and he's sitting there with a file with pages inside sort of plastic envelopes, you know. And I said, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm working out my set for tonight. And I thought, well, I thought you'd know what you're going to play. And he said, well, no, I've got all my past sets and I can remember how the audiences reacted. And he said also every stadium, every auditorium is different. It's going to resonate in a different way, and so I have to bear that in mind. And he was, and then he started talking about how you build a set. You know, you sort of take people up, and then you bring them down, and then you bring them up again, almost like gospel singers. You know, sort of. So I learned those sort of things from doing interviews with people, but it was useful. I was kind of learning from them lessons that I would apply to my poetry.
Yeah, probably your work as a poet help you to navigate being an artist yourself. Yeah, navigating in this world of art, and I think it's difficult when you don't have the sensitivity, the artistic sensitivity. Maybe it's like speaking another language. Right. It's something strange to you. Yeah. But when you are an artist and you are a Christian, if you really are both things, you can just put one thing under the other and disappearing. Right. You need to
integrate,
fully express and integrate both things.
Yeah. I mean, there've been times when I've obviously been able to share my poetry book with people I've interviewed. You know, I've given them a copy, and not long ago I was listening to an interview I'd done with Leonard Cohen in, I think, 1974. I was asking him a question, and he said to me, "Well, it's like in your poem, that one about the tongue." And I was taken aback a bit because I couldn't remember the exact words of the poem, but he was right. You know, he was making a point, and he was picking up on my poem. Because my first book of poetry was called Tonight We Will Fake Love, was published by a company called Charisma Books, and that was run by a record company boss, Tony Stratton Smith, and on their Charisma record label, they did Monty Python and Van de Graaff Generator as a sort of progressive group. And one of his partners in this Charisma Books venture was Leonard Cohen. And I read an item in Melody Maker that said that Tony Stratton Smith had collaborated with Leonard Cohen, and they were going to form this publishing company because they thought there were poets and novelists out there who were the equivalent of the Beatles and Neil Young or Bob Dylan. And when I read that, that's exactly the way I was thinking, exactly the way I was thinking. And I sent my poems in, and I had a call from Tony Stratton Smith, and he said, as you can imagine, having that news story in Melody Maker has meant we've had loads of people send in manuscripts, and I can't publish everything I get sent. And I said, fair enough, I know what you're talking about. And he said, but yours is one that we want to publish. So that ended up being my first book.
Your poetry book, yeah.
Yeah. My first poetry book, my first book. You know, I hadn't done any other sort of book at that point.
Yeah. Well, I'm currently reading, after reading a lot of other of your books, I'm reading this one, Hungry for Heaven. This one, in which you explore rock as a space of longing for transcendent. And you've written a lot of this classic rock generation. You spoke about the Beatles and Springsteen, and you wrote about U2 and Johnny Cash and so on. Today, the world is completely different in the musical scene. You see the streamings and the algorithm and the urban music dominate the music scene. A lot of people are wondering what will happen with rock and roll in this world of music. When you see today a musical landscape, how do you read it as a Christian? What kind of gospel or redemption narrative you find that today's music is offering to people?
To be honest, I don't really listen. I mean, I do listen to some contemporary music, but it kind of washes over me rather. I remember interviewing Sting once, and he said, "I don't know who makes the records that get played on Radio 1, BBC Radio 1, but they're not made by people. They're not making records for people like me. They're not made by." And I often feel that. I mean, they're not. If I listen to Leonard Cohen, you're seeing somebody, his career going from being like a young ladies' man to an older, reflective, religious, spiritual
guru
person. Yeah, over a period of 50, 60 years. Same thing with Bob Dylan. Same thing, I guess, with Paul McCartney in many ways. And from the perspective, when they're like 80 or something, you don't expect them to be writing as if they were 21. It'd be rather absurd if they were writing as if they were 21 or 17 or something. And I think it's true. Springsteen said something about it's the music you hear that you fall in love with when you're 15 really sort of stays with you for the rest of your life. That
probably
becomes the sort of benchmark that you judge everything else by. So I do tend to revisit the classic rock of, you know, the Who, the Dylan, the Beatles, the Stones, people like that, Jimi Hendrix, whatever, Leonard Cohen. And because I'm writing, like at the moment I'm writing a book about the effect of the Beat generation on rock music, I will. I find myself sort of diving into some music from the past and getting to know it better. Like I could be listening to Miles Davis, or it could be Appalachian folk music, or whatever it is. It pertains to my book, and I want to know it sort of inside out. And there's going to be some sort of benefit for me in becoming more expert in this type of music. Whereas if I listen to something made by a 17-year-old in his bedroom in London, that's probably not going to satisfy me in the same way. I don't know whether I've even got the. I mean, it's difficult for somebody who's lived through so many different periods of music to write about contemporary music I think Robert Christgau, who used to write for the Village Voice, did it quite well. I mean, he's I don't know what he's done recently, but he seemed to be as excited about each sort of stage of rock from, I guess, his earliest writings date back to the 60s onwards. But I find it's hard. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, who would you be thinking about when you say contemporary music?
We were talking before starting to record about the last album from Rosalía that came out just today.
Okay. Now, see, I'm not familiar with her.
I don't know your takes on it. How do you say it, or if you? I'm finding interesting that a lot of Christian imagery is coming on the surface again, but from different places. Okay. Like I was saying, Rosalía told that she was eager to be participating in a theology class in the university. Okay. And I was thinking, when theology become cool, like theology classes from university became cool again, no?
Well, some people, I mean, they rightly look at the Christian story, Christian literature, Christian art, and realize there's a great repository of symbols and stories, and sometimes think, oh, I could kind of use that. Maybe it would give my work a little bit of added depth. And they're not really committed to what's beneath it, but they just think, I remember there was a group called Echo and the Bunnymen in Britain in the 70s. They 80s more than the 70s, I think.
Yeah, they.
And they it's like liking stained glass windows or something like that. You know, they will add a little flourish of something like that to their music, and it gave it a sort of more important sound or feeling than if they hadn't. But not necessarily being committed to anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, Leonard Cohen draws on Christianity, Judaism, and slightly on Buddhism, and you feel they really are part of his story. They're things that he knows about and he's interested in. And, you know, he's committed enough to Buddhism to go to, you know, become a Zen monk, and the Judaism of his past, and yet, funnily enough, seems to value the Christian story in a not the sort of way you'd expect a Jewish person or a Buddhist to evaluate it. You see, he says some quite remarkable things about Jesus and faith and redemption, stuff like that.
And Jesus was a sailor when he walked upon the water.
Yeah. But also in his comments and quotes, when he talks about things like that, they're so thoughtful.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed he was.
I heard a really good talk recently. It was about 20 years old, but it was on YouTube by Camille Paglia, who's an academic and a sort of a lover of pop culture. And she was
I know her.
Bemoaning the lack of religious understanding today, and saying, I mean, she was raised in a sort of a Catholic family, I think went to a Catholic school. And she was sort of rejoicing in what that had given her and her ability to understand art movements and to understand Shakespeare and understand so much Western English and Western literature. And I think that's true. We talk about the Beatles, and John Lennon had that kind of repository of Christian language, and he would often allude to sort of the prodigal son or some story in the Bible. And you realize he obviously knew a lot more than he was saying. But he, you know, he'd gone through being sent to Sunday school and singing in church in a choir. Whereas I don't think Paul McCartney had
that kind of.
No, I mean, I read somewhere where he said he would go to different churches, like if his friends were going to a Methodist church, he might just sort of go along, but not to the sort of depth. But even him, you know, singing, you know, Mother Mary and stuff like that. I mean, it sort of naturally seeped into his music and gave it quite some power.
Yeah, like you enrich your narrative and your thought with a lot of symbols that came from Christian tradition.
Exactly.
Like you can quote Greek poetry, or I don't know, Oedipus King, those kind of things, like classical.
Well, you know, people used to quote Homer or the Iliad and the Bible, and now you're more likely to quote from, say, Batman or a TV series that everybody knows. Become the sort of
it's like the new mythology of our era.
It's like, you know, that edition of Friends or just some sort of reference.
The Simpsons.
Like exactly.
You always have a Simpson momentum to connect. Let's talk about these people you interview. You spend a lot of time studying individuals like Marvin Gaye and Johnny Cash and Van Morrison to write their biographies. These are all people who combine amazing talent with self-destruction, with spiritual hunger and a lot of moral contradiction. When you live a lot of time with those stories to write biographies, you probably start paying attention to some of the neat church narratives about the good Christians and the bad sinners, and you start to see the complexity in this debate. When you see real lives and not only categories, you see that real life is much messier than those kind of dichotomies, no? What have you learned from those biographies about holiness in the real world, and how that has shaped the way that you think and you speak about sin, about grace, about Christian testimony?
I think I was. I never had a plan when I started writing biographies. Like I will dedicate my life to writing about these types of people. But when I look back over them, I can see that I was attracted to people that had that kind of struggle in their life between sacred and secular, between the carnal and the spiritual, which is very much, when I look at it, Jack Kerouac, the beat writer who I did a book about, he had that struggle between the life on the road and the drugs and drink, and then the sort of conventions of Catholicism that he grew up with, and Elvis. Elvis. I remember talking to Elvis's minister, who said to me that Elvis had come to him and said, "Everything you told me to do, I haven't done. Everything you told me not to do, I have done, and I'm a most unhappy man."
In the peak of his career.
Yeah, it was, I think. Yeah, he said it must have been like either late 50s or very early 60s. This was the church he'd sort of grown up in when he arrived in Memphis, not in Tupelo. But again, there was a sort of a struggle between the wild life and then loving these old hymns. I think sometimes it's a sort of sentimental thing, like it's wrapped up with like your mother. Like
nostalgic, maybe.
Pardon?
Nostalgic, maybe.
Yeah. I think because when I interviewed Jerry Lee Lewis, he suddenly launched into the Pentecostal church saying it's not what it should be, and you know, you need to get down on your knees and pray for salvation. Oh, gosh, you know,
it's weird.
He doesn't even go to church himself. Why is he? But yeah, there's a sort of nostalgia for some stable life that once existed, like when they were growing up.
Yeah.
I can sometimes feel it myself. You know, you sometimes think, you remember those cozy days when you were in church and somebody's playing the organ or a piano and everything's kind of right, and there's no, you know, the snake has yet to come into the Garden of Eden. It feels a bit like that. But I yeah, and Marvin Gaye was torn between, I guess, a sort of a gospel career or something like his father, you know, his father being a preacher. So I think his father kind of looked down on him because he had gone into the secular music business, and yet envied him because far more people listened to what Marvin had to say than listened to what the father had to say. And I remember when I was doing research for that, I think I was at the church where he'd grown up, or the father had grown up in Kentucky, and there was a guy there who said to me, like, what should I do? My father says I shouldn't get into this music, because if you're not singing about God, then who are you singing about? And the implication was you're somehow sort of singing about the devil, or giving the devil the glory. There are quite a few people sort of trapped in that position. I remember interviewing Roy Orbison, who said that when he grew up in Wink in Texas, the only places to play in a band, like a country style band, would be in bars or clubs or whatever, and where you might have people dancing. And his denomination was very much against dancing and music and alcohol, so that would limit where you could play. So you were forced to make this decision, like either you're going to,
it might be the devil or it might be the Lord.
Yeah. Well, you either stay in the church and play church music and church songs, or you leave all that behind and you go into the secular world playing at dances. So that some of these people just thought, okay, well, I'll go into the dance halls, and they virtually turned their back on the church. It seemed like a false dichotomy they'd presented with, you know.
Maybe I think that the work that you have done for so many years, and the work I and a lot of people are trying to do, trying not to see as a dichotomy, could help a lot of artists not to feel that is my way or the highway. Staying in the church singing 4-chord songs, or going and praise the devil in the world. In order not to be a dichotomy, there need to be a lot of reflection, theological reflection, trying to understand the subtle bridges and communications that go back and forth from religion to culture to daily life to theology to Bible. It's not easy to build those bridges, but I think it's very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. I mean, when you have your own children, you think, you know, do you want them going off to, you know, bars and I mean, you realise there are temptations out there. There's a great likelihood of compromise, but I think there was a sort of thinking that if you sang about God, that was somehow Christian. But if you sang about love or all the stuff that's the very essence of our lives, you know, food and travel, and if you were to sing about any of those things, that would be somehow wrong. But it's not singing about the things that's wrong. It's how you sing about the things, isn't it? I mean, you can sing about adultery, which would not be good if you glamorized it. But to sing about love would not be wrong, and it's a large part of most people's lives. And just the if you don't sing about the ordinary things of life, or if I don't write about them in my poetry, then there's no bridge for people to cross, because I think he's unearthly, you know?
Yeah.
Like he's not, his feet don't touch the ground. You
Yeah.
know? Which is what goes back to what you were saying about the incarnation, that Jesus got,
Become fully
presumably got
human.
mud on his feet, you know, when he
Yeah.
walked around, or
Yeah.
cut his toe or whatever. He was in the world, but not of the world in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. We are followers of Jesus, who became fully human, but we don't want to become fully human.
Right.
We are more like the less human possible in order to become more spiritual.
Yeah.
But that's a kind of dichotomy that it doesn't respect neither the human experience, but neither the faith that we have. So it's important to build better bridges about it. And the next question I have, it has to do precisely with that and what we usually call the Christian art.
Yeah.
I don't like that category that much.
Right.
Very often the label Christian art describes a kind of subculture. You have books and music and mostly terrible movies that are mostly for believers, with really little artistic risk. And it looks like the church is happy as long as the message is clear and not giving a lot of importance if the art of it is not very good. Yeah. This is looking for an advice from you, from all your years thinking about this. What would you say to Christians who are also artists and they are trying to find their way, trying to find their voice, their calling, their vocation in the middle of all these struggles?
Right. Well, I think there is such a thing as Christian art, if you mean art that's about Christ or about stories from the Bible. I mean, there is definitely a thing of religious art, and I assume there's some people actually called to do that. And there's some people called to be like worship music leaders. You know, they do a good job, and it would be wrong of the guy or girl called to do worship music to try and make it big in the charts or you know, win a Grammy or something like that. So it's really sort of initially knowing your calling. What are you called to? Or you can do both. I mean, I would not be adverse to doing something specifically
liturgical,
obviously religious if the opportunity came along. But I think it's interesting for people if they see you've done something sort of very specifically Christian, or a poem, for example, that's in amongst a lot of other poems that they can relate to. So I think, well, if I can identify with this person here and here and here, how come I'm having difficulty identifying with that? But if there was a book of 50 poems that were all about biblical characters, you'd have less chance of reaching those people because they probably
can connect with it.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to some lectures on Buddhism recently, and I realized how people must feel when they hear lectures on Christianity. Like you feel sort of excluded because there are sort of like inner jokes and references and pronunciations of language and of words and names, and you feel as though you're on the outside looking in. But I think it's important to know what you're sort of called to do. And
that's key.
I'm all for encouraging people that are dedicated to sort of uncovering the Christian worldview in all its complexity. Unfortunately, I mean, Christian worldview, when I first heard that phrase, probably in the late 60s, seemed like something new. Now it's rather, you know, it's been brought into disrepute, really, because you have, you know, very far right people saying that they're putting forward a Christian worldview, and very far left people on the other side saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, they're battling.
Yeah. Whereas when I first heard the phrase, like the difference between Christian gospel, like the nub of the gospel, and Christian worldview. Like, I specifically remember thinking of it when I was writing about like tower blocks, because I always thought they were so depersonalizing people, you know, like, and I thought, yeah, but why would I be writing about it as a Christian? You think, well, that's exactly like dehumanization is an important issue to Christians. So tower blocks that, you know, one upon another that reduces people because, you know, you've got a reduced view and you don't have garden space. They're almost unhuman or anti-human places to exist. That's something worth writing about as a Christian.
Yeah, I take this idea about the importance to be aware of your calling and your vocation.
Yeah.
In order to navigate those worlds.
Well, yeah. When I was younger, I think a couple of big issues that predominated in the arts were dehumanization and alienation. And you know, when you step back and thought, have Christians got anything to say about that? Well, of course you do, you know, because the whole Garden of Eden story is about alienation, and the fight to redeem people is about rehumanizing people rather than dehumanizing people. So, I mean, the big issues today would be very different, I guess.
Yeah, probably. In a way, very different. In a way, mostly the same. It's like every era and every time changes the masks and the questions. But if you hear with attention, there are a lot of roots that connects all those different masks, and that can connect to the biblical narrative as well, and to the theological perspective of the kingdom of God.
Yeah, I think there's some issues that are timeless or should be timeless. And you need to keep repeating, which is why I suppose I like artists like Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan. I mean, they seem to sort of major on those issues. I mean, something like gender politics doesn't interest me as much, you know, as say alienation. I used to like, you know, plays by Samuel Beckett and Harold Pinter and people like that, where people just don't quite connect, you know, they're kind of separate and they speak nonsense to each other because they don't understand. I really sort of related to that when I first saw those productions.
Yeah, it's the classical element, the fact that the time changes and people from another time can still connect with that kind of truth and that kind of beauty that a special time find.
Well, like Ecclesiastes to me is a timeless book because you know, but it faces, you know, death. Like, what's the value of life in the face of death? That seems to be one of the most profound questions we can ask.
Yeah.
I doubt whether it's a question being asked in pop music today. It was asked a bit in the 60s. I think some very, very good questions were raised in the 60s, which Christians by and large didn't realize or recognize or take advantage of.
Yeah.
You know, we're just too busy saying Jesus is the answer. And,
what is the question?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think that was in a Peanuts cartoon, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think that Andre Crouch said as well.
Oh, did he? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I often feel that Christians, we look at culture as a one-way street. We think that we are the one who speaks, who explain, who correct, but we don't really listen back. A lot of the times we don't take seriously what the songs, the films, the stories of our times are trying to tell us. This is a more personal question, and we're getting near the end, like Sgt. Pepper. Okay. Thinking about your own faith journey, what practices or habits or disciplines have helped you to stay in this frontier we are talking about for so many years, without losing your faith, without losing your curiosity and without losing your gentle desire to connect and to keep talking with different persons.
Right. Well, I think background's a lot to do with it. I mean, if you've had a happy family and a stable, I admired my parents' faith. I even more as I mean, they're no longer alive, but I mean, as I look back, saw the the way they help the blind and the elderly, and without crowing about it, or the first people I ever met from Africa or whatever, people that Dad would bring home. Get a visitor from Nigeria come to see the the mass at the BBC radio station where he worked, and he'd say, well, come home, and then I'd meet these people at a time when you very rarely ever saw. We never saw an African in Daventry, in the town I grew up in. But even in London, they would be like, oh, somebody in tribal costume or something. Then, I mean, books have been enormously helpful to me, if there's an issue you're dealing with, to sort of be able to study it in depth. Church, I've been exposed to some great preachers like John Stott for many years at All Souls, and Martin Lloyd-Jones, who I read more than I heard, but his books were really helpful. Yeah, I've met some good people over the years. I think your family having a base to come back to, so you're not just sort of drifting through the world. And good friends, like I have a friend, Norman Stone. He makes films. He's a Christian, and we met when we were like 21 or something like that, and we're still friends. He was sitting in this chair. Sitting where you are, just a couple of weeks ago, and I can always relate to Norman because I know what he did a film about C.S. Lewis. He did the first Shadowlands, which was about C.S. Lewis. He did the TV version of it. And he's done some other films about C.S. Lewis. And I can relate to his, we understand each other because we have the same aspirations and hit a lot of the same problems as well.
Yeah.
And I read the Bible every day. I normally try to set myself new challenges to keep it fresh, because you can do these sort of like the Bible in 1 year, but that works 1 year. But to keep doing it every year, I think it's good to switch and set yourself new challenges. And when I pray, I try to list every day, like on a Monday, I pray for the Prime Minister and the government in America and the Army, Navy, Air Force, the hospitals. I've got this kind of list of things, so that, because you tend to just sort of pray for your family and then just forget all the other stuff like that. I've found that useful. Prayer is important, of course. Like any writer, I guess I don't actually journal in the sense that Americans use that word, but I do write a lot of stuff out, and that helps clarify things for me. I also try to engage with. From Facebook, you can tell when particular sort of preachers or theologians are becoming influential on people. So, have you heard of Richard Rohr?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I see his stuff affecting people, then I want to listen to what he's got to say, and then I want to get the books, and then I want to take notes. And he's a particularly good example of somebody. It's very hard to put your finger on what you find wrong about some of the things he says. It's very difficult. I listened to about 50 talks of his, and only just about got to a point where I could say, I think he's a bit wrong there. Because somebody said of a great theologian, he uses all the right words to say all the wrong things, which is quite a good quote. And if you hear somebody talk about mercy and justice and salvation and redemption and all that, it kind of soothes you and comforts you, and you think, oh yeah. But then you
it's
realize,
a familiar language.
Yeah. and then you realize all the right words, but not saying what you think they were saying. But I can confront somebody like that and make it strengthen me, because I'll get out a file and I'll write out all the good quotes and the not so good quotes, and kind of wrestle with it a bit and try and see, who influences him. And otherwise, I mean, we're talking about the conversation that we have with popular culture, but there's also this conversation going on between theologians and popular preachers that people are responding to.
Yeah.
And particularly, I mean, one of the good things about Facebook and things like that is that you can see these influences and discussions that people have. You'll hear people say things like, God is love, as though that was the only thing the Bible ever said was God is love, without defining what the love is. And, or it's all about justice, it's all about peace. And yes, but, and you want to sort of fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I think that we want to limitate the truth and the reality to just one thing, because it gives us more ability to dominate it. Okay, if it's just this, I can understand one concept.
Sure.
But the paradoxes and the tensions of the complex Christian theology is not difficult to deal with that.
Yeah. So I think one side of reading is reading people that kind of reinforce you and endorse you and build you up, and then sometimes you engage with people that are coming from another place altogether, and that can be useful in like building your muscle, like I was saying earlier, like a resistance exercise, but also equipping you to talk to people that might have fallen under the spell of a different preacher or different. I mean, I sometimes meet people that like Joel Osteen, and again, he's quite difficult to pin down what's actually, in my opinion, wrong about his theology, because he says lots of nice things and lots of encouraging things. You think, he doesn't dwell on the negative. He's just very buoyant and upbeat. But if I'm talking to somebody who's a huge fan, you just want to say, but be careful. Yeah. So you need to do a bit of reading to understand them.
Yeah, the complexity of it.
Yeah.
I have one final question. We could easily spend the rest of the day talking about Beatles songs, Beatles albums, Beatles stories. I am a Beatles nerd. I, in fact, wrote an entire book about the Beatles. But to be honest, in the nerd contest, you win, certainly, about being the more Beatle nerd. You wrote a lot of books about the Beatles. You spoke about them in conferences and different books, and you are definitely an author to quote because you know a lot of things about them. And I have one question, the last question about the Beatles, that maybe could look a little simple, but maybe it's not that simple. If you had to choose just one song from the Beatles catalog that served like a kind of map to understand our age, to understand the fears, the longings, the hopes, the spiritual questions of our age. You have more than 100 songs to choose. Right. Which song would you pick to trace a map, like a kind of map of our time, and why?
If I was wanting to be controversial, I could say like two key songs of the Beatles. I Want to Hold Your Hand, because I wrote a poem and I called it I Want to Hold Your Hand, and it's about the the need we have to hold people's hands, from childhood through to old age. And I let a friend of mine use it for some purpose. I was in a book that he was doing, that's right. And I got all these nice letters from people saying, oh, yeah, I remember when my husband was dying, I remember him reaching out and holding my hand. So I mean, I admit that they wrote it as a sort of coy love song where to hold a girl's hand was like the highest aspiration you'd have.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something profound about hand holding. I mean, when my grandchildren were born over the last couple of years, you know, I love that thing that they're sitting on your lap and you just take their hand and it just fits right in the palm of your hand. And just take a picture of it. There's something. I mean, the hand on the shoulder is one thing, a hug, but holding the hand, I think, is really a significant thing. Once Paul said, like, the greatest bit of poetry that they'd ever written was "Love Me Do."
Mm-hmm.
You know? So it's along those lines. Then the other song is "Why Don't We Do It in the Road."
Mm-hmm.
In some senses, that song's about, like, hey man, you know, we're all liberated. Like, why don't we just do it here? You know, who cares? But in another sense, it's one of the biggest metaphysical questions you could ask. Like, why don't we do it in the road? You know, why don't we just?
No one will be watching us.
Exactly. He was inspired by seeing these monkeys around the
in
place in
Rishikesh.
Rishikesh. Yeah. And I've seen the monkeys in Rishikesh. they're everywhere, and they're trying to grab hold of things in your hand. But he watched a couple of them mating and thought, why don't we do it in the road? Well, because the reason we don't do it in the road is because of, you know, our innate sense of dignity and all those things, the reasons why we wear clothes and acknowledgement that people might not, you know, if we were naked, they might not treat us in the way we deserve to be treated. I'm sure he didn't write it thinking he was making a philosophical statement, but I like to think that it's there. So in terms of a song that kind of sums up what the Beatles were about, I would think Penny Lane in a funny way, because Penny Lane is a song that is based on the idea of reenchantment. You're taking that's the word, ordinary scene. You know, if you've been to Penny Lane, you know it's not particularly glamorous. In fact, it's not glamorous at all.
No.
Yet Paul makes it magical, and there's an indication in the song that it's raining. You know, somebody's wearing a Mac.
Yeah.
Yet also it's blue suburban skies. They don't sort of fit together.
It doesn't fit
it's
together.
Enchanted world. And I think through maybe through the hysteria of Beatlemania, through drugs, through different diets, through meditation, they were trying to sort of reach this new state of consciousness. And Penny Lane's not telling people how to have a new state of consciousness, but it's looking at the world with a new state of consciousness. You know, Paul was able to look at a pretty ordinary suburban scene in a pretty ordinary northern city, and see something of magic and glamour. Probably like we all look at our childhoods in that way, as magical, because we forget all the not so good pieces of our life and just remember the good things.
Yeah, that's why I like a lot Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, because I think that those two songs that start the magical 67 year, they it's like this word that you use, the reenchantment. There is a profound movement, I think, like a displacement in Western society after a lot of years that secular thinkers and religion sociologists were speaking about the disenchantment of the world. This Durkheim or Weber theory, Weber, I think, about the disenchantment of the world. There needs to be a reenchantment. And in fact, I think that this is a key idea to understand this world. Even if people are like torn apart between the Mac in the pouring rain and the blue suburban skies, this tension between the dark and the light, I think is very present in our society, and I think it's an important key to understand the longings and the fears. So
it's a bit like magical realism in Spanish literature, you know, where
indeed.
ordinary things suddenly become extraordinary. And I'm sure he'd not read any magical realism, but that seems to be the effect that was created by the song. Plus, George Martin's immense wealth of experience of working with dance bands and military bands and comedy and choirs, and just amazing guy to have. If they hadn't met him, I don't know what they would have become. They wouldn't have become the Beatles as we know them.
Yeah,
he just had that repertoire in his head of all these types of music, and he loved spoken word and comedy. And
yeah, he was amazing.
Just worked so well with them. And I think in one of my books, I think it was maybe Beatles 66, I was pointing out the strange thing that the Beatles did these groundbreaking recordings in EMI studios, which is like the equivalent of like the BBC or the Army or something, like a British institution. And George Martin kind of represented the, almost like the headmaster or the authority figure from that world. The BBC allowed Monty Python to be created and the Goons, and they're all kind of wild and unrestrained, and yet they were birthed in this austere institution or august institution of the BBC. And it's funny that the Beatles would change so much, yet I think it shows that if you establish some sort of boundaries, that people feel sort of free to sort of push a little bit and push a little bit. Whereas if it was all like it's people sitting around smoking and drinking and whatever, they wouldn't have produced those records.
Yeah. There is a analyst of Beatles catalog that speaks about the importance of this tension between the high culture and the low culture in British society as an important foundation of what the Beatles, but not only the Beatles, the Who, Pink Floyd, Radiohead, all these great bands.
Yeah, because the Who had Kit Lambert was their manager, and Kit Lambert's father was Constance Lambert, who was a composer and conductor.
Yeah, you have all this tension.
So he thought, why can't you do a rock opera?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's very important to understand English music, and especially the Beatles.
You've got, like, on the one hand, they used to call it sort of end of the pier entertainment. You had these piers that jutted out into the sea, and at the end of it, you'd normally have a ballroom or something. And then you'd have comedy and like vaudeville, as the Americans would call it. Somebody riding a monocycle, trapeze artist, just to sort of entertain people. And you get a bit of that with the Beatles, or like Sgt. Pepper. It's like we're here to entertain you, in that old-fashioned sense of the word. But then there's aspirations to the avant-garde and a bit of classical music and all that sort of thing.
Yeah. Steve, thank you very much for your time. It was amazing to separate this space to know you and to speak about all these things that trouble us, that interest us, and that we love. So thank you very much. And I hope that everyone who's watching will go on right now and buy a lot of the beautiful books that you wrote. Thank you very much.